American national government. This is Dr. Patrick Stewart. Chapter 14, the bureaucracy. In this segment, we'll be considering the learning objective of describing Max Weber's model of bureaucracy and its component parts. So let's get started. Now, the history of bureaucratic theory really starts with the political theorist Max Weber, who's more of a sociologist than anything, and he set the foundations for bureaucracy. Now, what he saw originally is that bureaucracy needed to be a secretive, strict hierarchy with authority flowing from the top down, and this would allow for the replacement of traditional and charismatic authority with that of the rational legal rule. In turn, this would provide for expertise that would provide, guidance and the application of coercive authority of government based upon rigid rules and regulations. Now, the basic idea behind this, and something that's been developed to a much greater extent since then, is the idea that once a political system exceeds a certain size, it becomes too complex for face-to-face interactions. In other words, if you don't know the people that you're dealing with, you need to have a set standards to deal with them in an administrative situation. Now, Robin Dunbar has come up with Dunbar's number, which suggests that 150 people is about the number of people, plus minus around 30 to 50, that we can actually deal with. And that maybe around 1,500 people are the people that we know. So there are cognitive limits to the amount of people that we can deal with. So coming forward and bringing forth a bureaucracy, which provides for a predictable execution of rules and standards, especially in a society that values equality, becomes highly important. So what are some of the distinguishing characteristics? And we see that there are 5 of them according to the Bavarian model of bureaucracy. The first is that of division of labor. Work is divided according to the task specialization. So individuals can specialize, develop their skill sets to a much greater extent, and become experts. The second is hierarchy. Here you have a clear vertical chain of command. Work flows downward, and the individuals at the lowest levels do the actual applied work, and then there is guidance that comes from above. The third is that of formal rules. Bureaucracies operate according to standard operating procedures, and that is the essential element, is that there are standards that you can abide by regardless of where you're at, and they're applied equally to everyone. So, for instance, we would expect a police officer to pull over whoever is speeding, regardless of their vehicle, regardless of who's in the vehicle, and ticket them accordingly, even if this person was a family member, or if it was a person that they did not know. So that's what we expect out of these formal rules. Connected with this is the maintenance of files and records. Bureaucracies need to record their actions and keep records, so they can refer back to this to make judgments as to how equal their application of the law is. And certainly this allows for the making of better law when you can analyze how policies have been carried out and what their impacts are on society. And finally, and connected with all of the above, is the idea of professionalization. Bureaucrats are appointed on the basis of their qualifications. Now, this might be education, this might be work experience, but certainly they develop qualifications over the course of their life, and then they develop a career. And this career allows for them to focus on their skills and provide society with their skill set over the course of their life, maintaining stability not just for the individual, but also for society at large. Now, the underlying premise for this is that there is a merit system at work. However, if we go to more of a charismatic traditional approach, the spoils system is what was the precedence. In other words, the spoils system occurs when government jobs are awarded on the basis of loyalty and not performance. In other words, if you voted for someone, if you did favors for someone, or if you had personal or familial connections, then you would be rewarded with jobs. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that it promotes corruption and incompetence. Instead of relying on someone who is an expert in the field, who has developed professional skills, you have a variety of different individuals filling positions that they're just not prepared for. Now, this approach dominated bureaucracy for most of the 19th and the early 20th centuries, and it started changing. Now, part of it was the appreciation by Max Weber as far as what bureaucracies ought to be. There was also a realization that as society grew larger, there needed to be bureaucratic solutions and the application of governmental policies to everyone equally. Now, when we look at the merit system itself, we see that it defines skills and knowledge required for a job, and then it provides a way to test prospective employees on their ability. Now, ultimately, the question is, what is the best test? But with this, we see that bureaucrats are hired and promoted on the basis of their qualifications, in other words, the skills and the knowledge that they have, but then also their job performance, how well they do their job. Now, how well you do your job isn't necessarily connected with the popularity of your job. So, for instance, if you're doing a job that everyone likes, so for instance, you're providing funding to a variety of different agencies or individuals, people will like you to a greater extent, or if you're providing services. However, for instance, if you work for the Treasury Department as part of the Internal Revenue Service, you're probably, if you're doing your job, people won't like you that much because you do your job very well. Same thing with a policeman who arrests people, if that is a part of the job. Of course, that's only part of the job of the police. Now, the one great thing about the merit system is that because of this, it reduces potential for corruption and incompetence that was the case with the spoils system. So, underlying this is that public agencies have neutral competence. They make their decisions based upon their expertise rather than political considerations. Now, this is the theoretical realm. The real world oftentimes finds that the bureaucracy does not decide policies, and while it doesn't take sides in the political arena, implementing of political decisions is, in turn, political, regardless of how neutral you are. So what we're finding here is that insulating bureaucracy from politics is exceptionally difficult because it is connected with politics. It is the hand that actually does the work. Now, the bureaucrats themselves and the federal bureaucracy is largely staffed with people who are hired for their expertise rather than their political or partisan loyalty. And that is one of the key ways of knowing that government is working and is not being subverted by negative influences, is that the people who are hired aren't hired because of their connections with certain businesses, families, or wealth or whatnot, but because that they have the proper education, the proper skill sets to do their job. Now, most of the federal employees are paid according to the general schedule or the GS pay scale. And what we'll see on the next page is that the GS5 through GS7 is the range in which most college graduates would enter the governmental workforce. And so, as you'll see, it's a range from around $27,000 to about $35,000 per year. So it's a fairly low-paying starting point. But what is given up for this lower wages is higher stability within the governmental service, as well as serving a cause that you believe in, which is that of the United States of America and the values that it has. Now, the typical federal government bureaucrat, and it tends to be a white male in mid-40s, and the great majority of, well, not majority, but the plurality, around 40%, have college degrees, so it's highly educated. And while the bureaucracy does do a better job of representing the general public, it certainly can do a better job down the road. Now, here's what the GS scale looks like. And this is certainly old, and this comes out of the book. But as we see, there's steps here within the grade, and that's as you move up within the bureaucracy. You move up steps until you get to the next grade, and that's how you make your income. Now, certainly one thing that we do know is that over the past almost decade now, we're looking at federal bureaucracy that really hasn't raised the wages of their staffers, which in turn has an influence on who is willing to get into government. So, coming towards the end here, one of the things that we look at is we see that there are not only public bureaucracies, but private bureaucracies. Now, the private bureaucracies rely on their clientele directly for sustenance and are willing to make concessions to them individually. Now, of course, that is if it's in a competitive situation. As you probably have experienced with corporations that have monopolies or near monopolies, their level of concessions is probably not very high. Now, public bureaucracies rely on the state for their sustenance, so it's indirect, it's through the taxpayers. So they have to please their superiors, who are the elected officials. And thus, as a result, if their clientele does not have political clout, they may denigrate them over time and even feel superior to them. So ultimately, it's the feedback of the population, the taxpayers, that plays a role in how public bureaucracies carry out their jobs. So, ultimately, the question is, what is public administration? Now, theoretically, bureaucrats administer policy decisions of accountable officials. But the truth of it is that they are involved in making policies, and there is a gulf between policymaking and implementation. Because implementation is tangible and it's felt at the lower levels, policymaking by our legislators tends to be broad and symbolic. It allows for them to have some leeway and to step away if a policy breaks down. They can blame the bureaucrats. Also, changes in technology bring about a need for flexibility. And so certainly there's an awful lot of changes within bureaucracy. So let's take a look at the government. It's rather large, and as we see, there's an awful lot of independent agencies and departments. Now finally, let's go ahead and take a look at institutional rational choice, just briefly. The idea here is that when we look at the implementation, the administration of law, the executive branch is the operational level, whereas the collective choice level is what's chosen, and that's the legislative level. Those are the statutes, the laws, and the regulations. And the constitutional level is that which is allowed in the system, and that is the judicial level. So ultimately, the insights that we have here is that decisions at the highest level, the judiciary and the legislative branch, influence what can happen at the lower levels. And ultimately, what is done, the implementation, is based upon what is done at the collective choice, the legislative level, and the judicial level. So ultimately, all three branches are involved with these checks and balances. American national government.